Hello, dear investors. I think we are live. Welcome to the subsequent funds and recoveries. Ask Mintos Anything about funds and recovery. So as usual, you have me, Janis. I'm heading the partnerships team at Mintos, and Dmitry Amelin, who's heading our recoveries efforts at Mintos. So similarly to previous calls or updates, we will have an agenda where we will focus on kind of three key parts. The first one is a high-level update on the recoveries. We'll update the information on how much was recovered in the first quarter, what are our expectations for recoveries going forward, and how those expectations have changed compared to how we saw them a quarter ago. And then also kind of we'll zoom out on the big picture, so how the long-term returns look in light of those recoveries and expected recoveries. Then the second block, we will move to the general questions, or these are the kind of questions that we received through Slido from you, dear investors, and we have kind of bundled them and ranked in order of popularity, and we'll address those. And then eventually we'll go to the case-specific questions, again, which we have received from you through Slido. We have bundled those questions by lending company. And then at the end of the call, if time allows, we will move to any unanswered questions that still remain on Slido, and we'll go through them in the order of their popularity. So that's in brief the agenda for today. So let's kick it off. So first off, the high-level update on how the recoveries have went in the first quarter. So first off, we expected to recover 3.8 million euros in first quarter, and compared to that, we were actually able to recover 7.2 million euros. So all in all, a very decent progress in terms of recoveries. And as you can see from the chart, then the largest impact on better than expected performance was from Monego, where we finally started receiving payments from Monego liquidator in Kosovo of the repayments they have received from Monego borrowers. Then the other contributor was Akulaku, which was paying like a clockwork, and then made payments in the size of 2.5 million euros in the first quarter. And also Getbox Botswana, where we actually were able to recover 400,000 euros, as opposed to rather kind of dim expectations in the beginning of the quarter. On the flip side, the deals or the recoveries that didn't go as well was Shatka Finance, where the payments ceased coming through, and Finko Ukraine, where Finko had collected repayments from the borrowers, but there were administrative difficulties actually making the transfer from Ukraine to April. But since then, those have been made and are now reflected in April recoveries. So all in all, a good quarter in terms of the recoveries. What does it mean for the big picture? So if we look at all of the lending companies which have been suspended on Mintos Marketplace, and this is the slide that we also showed in the previous Ask Mintos Anything, but what we thought it kind of makes sense to revisit that, given that probably some of you didn't join in the previous time. So if we look at the kind of all of the lending companies that have been suspended on Mintos Marketplace, then at the moment the initial exposure of the investors in loans invested in lending in loans that have been issued by those lending companies was 134 million euros. So that's 1 million more than the kind of number was a quarter ago. And the reason for that is in this quarter, as you may have noticed, there was one new lending company whose loans were suspended on Mintos Marketplace, eCash from Ukraine, although the amounts at risk there are comparatively small, just approximately 1 million euros. Out of this kind of total exposure at risk, which is 134 million euros, so far we have been able to recover 51 million euros. And for those of you who joined in the last time, you may see that this number is by 10 million euros larger than the previous time. So since our last talk, we have been able to recover extra 10 million euros. So when kind of still we look at this big picture, then we do see that the recoveries proceed in kind of different pace. So on one hand, we have cases where we already have achieved full recovery, Ute, Kosovo, and Fiji. Then there are some cases where we see that unfortunately there will be some loss for the investors for sure, like Rapido, Eurocent, CashWagon, and then the kind of rest are somewhere in between. We do see that there's a possibility of full recovery, but there's still uncertainty associated with that. And when we take into account all of these kind of cases which are in progress, and then also take into account what has been recovered so far, then our aggregate final recovery estimate is approximately in the range of 55 to 60% of the initial exposure suspension. What does it mean for the returns of the investors? So for investors who have been investing for several years in a row, in a way they're kind of long-term investors, as I think kind of any investment should be perceived. Then we see that the net long-term return, and net is kind of after the write-offs on the bad debt, is in the range from 8 to 10% per annum. 8 to 10% because it depends kind of for how long the investor has been investing. For someone who's been investing since 2015, that would be closer to 10%. For someone who's joined more recently, it would be closer to 8%. And that is a very competitive return when you compare it to other asset classes like stocks or high yield bonds, not to even kind of mention lower risk investments such as investment grade bonds or government bonds, where the returns are very low and in many occasions even negative. Speaking about returns, we would highly encourage you to also visit our historical performance page, where you can see kind of more in-depth calculations as to what has Mintos returns have been in each of the years, how they compare to other asset classes, and what will be the return depending on how the recoveries will go. So that's, I think, highly informative resource. So please do go and check it out. Yeah. So what about then second quarter? This is the slide where you can see the current exposure, the stage in which we are with regard to each of the recoveries, and also our estimate for the lifetime recovery, timing for that, and also our estimate for near-term recovery or the recovery for this quarter. As you can see, then the expected recovery for second quarter is 6.5 million euros, so more than we expected to recover in the previous quarter. And there have been some changes in terms of kind of our level of disclosure, or in terms of our timeline within which we expect to conclude the recoveries. So two major changes are ExpressCredit and Finko Ukraine. In both of those occasions, we have managed to sign restructuring agreements, which will ensure the best possibility for full recovery for the investors. And then the timeline has been set, the payment schedule has been created, and I'll kind of go into more detail about that in the subsequent slides about each particular lending company. Then, Dmitry, perhaps you also want to kind of just briefly shed some light on some of the cases that you've been working with. I see there are also some kind of changes in recovery plans.
Sure, Yanni, thank you. Good afternoon, dear investors. So let me highlight, first of all, Monego case, where earlier we said that we're not able to tell you exactly what is our recovery expectation. Now, when we've reached certain progress in terms of monetary, in terms of cash flow on that particular case, and also we've established quite a working contact with the liquidator team. So therefore, here we can say that we still expect a recovery being less than 100%. However, we're certain that we'll have more recoveries here than you have seen previously. Also, we have a quite breakthrough in one of Polish loan originators, Aforti. There is enforcement taking place at the moment in its active phase. We will get to details later. On the downside, unfortunately, the client called Dziesiątka Finance Poland stopped paying. They've also, unfortunately, not helping us to help them by sharing information with us, and this has accordingly been reflected here in the slide.
Thanks, Dmitry. So that wraps up the big picture. So let's now proceed to the questions we have received from you on Slido. And as mentioned, we start with the general questions that don't relate to kind of a particular lending company or loans of a particular lending company. So first one is about functionality of Mintos. Could the review of pending payments be split between pending principal payments and pending interest payments for the investor? So there we have actually created a feature request in the feature request section in Mintos community space, and we would actually appreciate if the author of the suggestion would just kind of elaborate a bit more on how they would like to see this, and then definitely all the other investors are also welcome. And then we can take that feedback and then incorporate that into our considerations when we plan for subsequent functionality builds on Mintos Marketplace. So please do kind of check out Mintos community space, comment as to what exactly would you see within this feature, and then we'll see whether that can be built in some time. Why distribution of recovered funds isn't adjusted and transparent for each investor? Investors in Finko AM last cashback campaign with BB buyback loan will recover 0 and 70%. Dmitry, want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, dear investors, I have to say that we have received a number of questions on how we distribute funds. Those questions are worded differently and appear in different content. And to be honest with you, we're very happy to have them because this is the evidence of the progress in recovery. Yanni, you maybe remember that in the first ARMA, mostly questions were like, what are you doing to have anything? Now, when investors are asking, how do I get my cash? How is it distributed? This is a sign of that we're moving forward. And this is very fair to have those questions. So the funds, let me take two examples. If this is a regular loan originator or a suspended loan originator but not defaulted. So in this case, loans which are repaid first, those funds are then distributed to respective investors. This rule works for all companies. For defaulted companies and suspended, where there is nothing really on the platform, those investments, it's the same waterfall principle. Those investments that occurred first are also repaid first. Yanni, maybe you can give a specific comment on Finko case. I think it's the same principle.
Yeah. So it kind of should be the same principle. Okay, as then kind of for the next question, jokers from Groupier say they have filed legal action against Dazarplati on 15th of February 2021. What it means for Mintos investors with investments in Dazarplati loans. So Dazarplati has supposedly reached out to Groupier to get a bank account number to which they can make the payments, but haven't been able to establish any contact with Groupier. Dazarplati is ready to make the payment once there is a bank account to which the payment can be made. As for the impact on the Mintos investors, the amounts or outstanding investments, the amounts of outstanding investments in Dazarplati loans and Groupier platform are around 600,000 euros, and half of that, approximately 300,000 euros, is due. Compared to more than 20 million euros in net portfolio of Dazarplati, those are relatively minor amounts. So we believe there shouldn't be any impact on Mintos investors from this case. Can we have the same bar chart on recovery as Mintos has for pending payments? Of course, not daily, maybe weekly or monthly. Yeah, so thanks for the suggestion. That's also something we will take into consideration when deciding on the subsequent functionality updates that we will build. Yeah, so next batch of questions. Credit Star often had overdue amounts and they still don't have financials audited by a proper Big Four. How long will you still support them? Don't you see? I guess that's meant default. So as for Credit Star, we have discussed both of those issues with the Credit Star, and Credit Star has promised to deliver Big Four audit for the year 2020 this May. So that's something we're very much looking forward to. The latest change in pending payment is reducing transparency. When will you bring back a regular report showing the total of pending payments per loan originator? So the thing about pending payments is that some pending payments occur naturally because of the way how our weekly settlement process works. So for example, the borrower makes a repayment to the loan originator on Monday, and we have then the weekly settlement with the lending company, with the loan originator on Thursday. So there's like 3 or 4 days of pending payment, which is actually nothing out of the ordinary. And it actually works the other way around as well. So let's say the investor invests in a loan on Monday, and the investor starts to generate returns on the funds which have been invested in that loan. But the lending company also receives those funds only as part of the weekly settlement, which happens on Thursday. So from the lending company's perspective, they actually kind of have to share the interest they are receiving from the borrower, even though they haven't yet received the kind of investment from the investor. So the recent changes that we implemented for the pending payments updates, we actually try to simplify it and kind of put the spotlight on the pending payments, which already kind of fall outside of these kind of normal boundaries of the weekly settlement process, and where the settlements from the lending companies to Mintos are late. So we would actually argue that this is more informative for the investors, because that puts the spotlight on these kind of let's call it abnormal pending payments, which kind of cannot be just explained by this weekly settlement process. Is it investment in loan, or is it a loan to LO? I don't get it. Dmitry, do you get it?
Well, I do. let me share with you, the investors, how should it be understood. So let's consider 2 scenarios. In when you are investing directly in the loan, there is assignment agreement in a direct structure. We have it in several jurisdictions. there the investment goes in an ultimate loan, which a borrower takes. In some jurisdictions, we have so-called indirect structure, where your investment is going into a claim to the loan originator, but in no way your investment is going into equity or whatever into a loan originator itself. So it's as simple as this.
So to elaborate on that, in some situations, I mean, or in most of the situations, we have the direct assignment structure where you are actually kind of purchasing claim rights against the end borrower. In some jurisdictions, we just kind of cannot implement that structure. Hence, we have this indirect structure that Dmitry spoke about. But kind of in either way, whether you have direct or indirect investment structure, the repayment to the investor is directly kind of tied to the underlying loan. So at the end of the day, it is investment in loan, and it's just kind of these legal forms may be different depending on the legislation of where the loan was issued. Why do you still offer loans from Inclusion, MyBucks, and ExpressCredit? They have funds in recovery for many, many months already. So with the way how we evaluate investments is on a kind of lending company by lending company basis, not we don't just kind of blindly bundle them in groups in which they can belong to. So, and it is possible to have situations where it's only one of the lending companies in a group which is facing loan performance which is so weak that the lending company cannot immediately meet its obligations to investors in full. So it cannot or will not transfer the borrower's repayments in full, and it cannot or will not transfer the buyback prices in full. And at the same time, you have the entities in the group which are still which have performing loan portfolios, which they can service and honor the buyback guarantee. So in such situations, we would be okay with continuing to offer loans from the other entities, as those would be still deemed to be a decent, good investment opportunity for the investors. A critical prerequisite that I would like to stress here is that for this to happen, is that the lending company's management and shareholders have to be super forthcoming and willing to solve the situation with the entity where the loan performance has deteriorated and which is struggling with meeting its obligations to the investors, so that the management and shareholders are willing to solve it in the best interest of investors, so that investors recover their funds. If that willingness is not there, then surely we will not continue facilitating investments in loans issued by other entities in that group, because that's kind of a very, very important signal that there is no kind of intention to resolve the situation in the best interest of the investors. After launching promo, e.g. cashback campaign, loan Originator goes belly up. How its latest investors, once who enrolled in promo campaign, are protected. So the investors who invested through a promo campaign are protected in the very same way as the investors who invested without a promo campaign. So Mintos does the very same due diligence on lending company with or without a promo campaign. Mintos does the very same monitoring on a company, irrespective whether it does offer or does not offer the promo campaigns. And also the security which is applied to the transaction structure is also the very same. So often we have pledges on loan portfolios. We tend to have corporate guarantees from the other entities in the group, and so on. So it's the very same level of protection for the investors. Yeah. Are there any further crowdfunding rounds expected for Mintos, or did you raise enough equity? So I guess this doesn't particularly relate to the recoveries, but if it's there and has been afforded, then we're happy to take this one as well. So we don't plan any new crowdfunding rounds at this moment. We might raise a larger venture capital round later in the year, though. Do you think that your Mintos score for inclusion, buybacks, and ExpressCredit is appropriate? So I think this is a bit similar to one of the previous questions where we spoke about why loans from a group of lending companies are still being offered if one of the entities in that group has been suspended. And with the risk score reflects that kind of very same approach. Risk score is a reflection of the risk of investments in loans issued by a particular lending company, not a group. And if we look at each of those individual lending companies, then there's very kind of clear reasoning why the Mintos risk score is as it is. So, for example, for Inclusion Kenya, the loan supply subscore is 7, and that's definitely supported by the performing portfolio they have there. Loan servicer subscore is 8, and that's driven by solid underwriting standards. We see that also internal governance framework is satisfactory, but there is some room for improvement, so the score isn't 9 or 10. Similarly, buyback obliger is subscore is 8, and given that there's a group guarantee, we see that on a group level there's satisfactory financial performance, good capitalization, and there's also other businesses in the group which are not funding their loans on Mintos. So that's kind of just a reflection of how we go about setting risk scores and all of the subscores as well. When will you start adding new solid loan originators again, even if they only offer 4 to 5% return? That's a very good question. So we're actually in process of adding some such loan originators to Mintos Marketplace. We plan to do it as soon as in June. The thing about the lower risk, lower return investments and loans is that at least in the past, or a few years ago probably, or last year, years before that, we saw that there's more limited demand from the investors. So while kind of there has been kind of a verbal interest of such loans, when the kind of actual actions by the investors have been more muted. So somehow this kind of lure of relatively higher risk and higher return investments, that has been too strong. So what I'm kind of trying to say with this is that we will add kind of a couple of lending companies with this kind of lower risk, lower return loans. And if we will see that there is sufficient demand from the investors, and then that's actually kind of where the demand lies, then we would be very happy to bring more such kind of lower risk, lower return investment opportunities to meet investors. To increase transparency, can you please provide first paying loans, originator failed to transfer funds, and second non-paying loans where the defaulted buyback obligation?
I think Jan, this question takes us to the next slide.
Yeah.
So the investors here we're showing on the right-hand side. There are two columns. One of them represents amounts in recovery for 60 days overdue and buybacks, which is exactly represents the second part of questions, those loans which are in problem and they cannot be repaid by the ultimate borrowers, and therefore the loan originator is not able to channel the cash back because there is simply no cash to channel. On the right-hand side, there is a column also in this square, amounts in recovery for borrower repayments. So these are those repayments which are actually taking place at the loan originator side. However, they are not channeled and they're not passed back to you, the investors. So this is where it can be seen, and the report is called Funds in Recovery Update, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It is available on a regular basis.
Thanks, Dmitry. So this concludes the general questions. Now we move to the case-specific questions that we have received from investors on Slido, and again we'll kind of have bundled them by a lending company. First up is eCash. Dmitry, the floor is yours.
Sure. eCash is a Ukrainian loan originator with 1.1 million exposure. Basically, there are two questions. What is the current stage with eCash and the recovery perspectives? The other question, what is about eCash? So, dear investors, let me give you, first of all, a quick update, and then we can share what we're doing at the moment to resolve the situation. So, as you know, as we shared with you, this loan originator was suspended recently. We've been informed by the company's management that the wind down route will be taken. And also taken into account that loan originator was 7 days overdue with a pending payment, we took a decision to protect you, the investors, and to suspend eCash from Mintos Marketplace platform. So that is what happened. Currently, the company's management is of an opinion that all proceeds from the loan portfolio, which is financed by you, the investors, should be spread pro rata between you and also the investors, eCash investors. This would bring to a recovery rate which is around 25%. We're not happy with this recovery rate, A, and B, we are of an opinion that any proceeds from the loan portfolio, which was financed by you and also pledged in favor of Mintos Finance, should be repaid to you first, and then any other proceeds goes to eCash investors and shareholders. In a modern world, if there was a liquidation of the company or bankruptcy, which we hope is not going to be the case, but talking theoretically, it would be exactly the same sequence: secure creditors, other creditors, shareholders. I think we will be able to deliver this message to the company management once again. Also, in the meantime, I have to say that the company's management made certain efforts to attract investment into the company. However, so far this has not been successful due to reasonable economic downturn in Ukraine, which everybody is aware of. Next slide, please.
All right, next one is CashWagon.
CashWagon, we have a free question here, and the first question asked by Sebastian is, what about CashWagon? A lot of time has passed and still have not received anything. So, Sebastian and the investors, let me give you an update on the CashWagon. So we have 3 countries: Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. Let me take you country by country and give you an update what is happening at the moment in each of them. In Indonesia, the company entered into liquidation. There is a liquidator appointed with whom we are in a close and regular contact, video calls, emails. Any proceeds from the liquidation, any proceeds from the loan portfolio sold, or any proceeds from other assets the company may have in Indonesia will be split within liquidation process, and any funds recovered there will be transferred to you. We think we had a catch up with the Singaporean liquidator last week, and Indonesia here is in Singapore jurisdiction, and the holding company is in Singapore. That's why we have Singaporean liquidator. It may take another 6 months to finalize liquidation process in Indonesia. In Philippines, the liquidator is still not sure whether it's going to be a bankruptcy or liquidation, but the amount of debt is higher there, and therefore it will take longer. It may take up to a year for a legal process in Philippines. In Vietnam, we have a different story. You are all aware of the criminal proceedings which struck the company. Currently, we are in the contact with management of the company on ground and with the key shareholder as well. The largest asset we have at the moment is loan portfolio. Unfortunately, the loan portfolio in Vietnam is not of a quite decent quality. To give you just an indication, 90% of that portfolio is day past due year plus, which means that the upside is difficult. Also, the portfolio is toxic in the market due to criminal proceeding background which took place in the country, and everybody is aware, and market players are aware of that. We have approached 5 different market players, and we have not received a satisfactory bid for if we sell portfolio on the whole. However, one of those market players is still prepared to service this portfolio and keep their fee and whatever is recovered less the fee channel to us, so they can pass it to the investors. There were, I think, I recall several questions in this investor space asking whether they're going to be a legal proceeding in Vietnam. Theoretically, Vietnam should be also subject in part to liquidation on the Singapore level. However, until you have a criminal proceedings taking place on ground, no civil legal process, liquidation, bankruptcy, court case, anything can actually take place. We do not have rose glasses in terms of what the recovery upside is going to be. However, we're doing everything possible to minimize the loss or to maximize any and to explore any recovery potential with that particular loan originator. Next slide, please.
All right, Finko Ukraine. Then this is one of the deals or lending companies which I mentioned very kind of at the very beginning of our call, where we have been able to reach an agreement on restructuring, and the agreement calls that the other affiliated entities of Finko Ukraine have committed to repay north of 8 million euros for Finko Ukraine liabilities. That will lead to kind of recovery of the lion's share of the remaining exposure, and then this remaining part of the exposure that's planned to be covered with funds from debt collection that will come from loans in Ukraine. Yeah, so that's kind of the key news. In terms of this 1.2 million euros from Finko, I think I also touched upon that. There was difficulties in just kind of making the transfer practically. I think Dmitry can then kind of mention more about that, I think, in the context of AlexCredit, but that's kind of a Ukraine-wide thing about making the cross-border payments. Yet that has been resolved in terms of that 1.2 million euro payment. We have received that in April. That has already been distributed to the investors. Then Finko Armenia Varks. How comes that recoveries from Varks may be below 100% if it has Finko Group guarantee? Reminder, Finko and Mintos have the same owners. Both are located in the same building. So actually, Mintos and Finko don't have the same owners. There is some shareholder overlap, but it's definitely not the same. As for the possibility of recoveries being below 100%, well, the guarantee, or be it buyback guarantee or be it a group guarantee, it's a legal obligation for a certain party to fulfill kind of certain duties or make certain payments. So for the group guarantees, what we kind of saw in Finko Group case was that Armenia was actually the cash cow of the business, and the kind of enforcing the group guarantee and kind of litigating and going after the other entities in Finko Group would have led to actually subpar recoveries in Finko Armenia, as there would be disruptions to servicing there. Moreover, that would actually impair the repayments or recoveries for other investors who had invested in loans issued by other lending companies in Finko Group. So the presence of the group guarantee, just like the buyback guarantee, doesn't mean that it's a risk-free investment. There's kind of still risks involved, and the group guarantee is definitely kind of a plus, but it doesn't take away the risks inherent in investing in loans. Please update on CashWagon and Finko status. So as for kind of a general update on Finko Armenia or Varks, the repayment plan that we had shared earlier for loans that have been issued by Varks does very heavily depend on the kind of repayments that Varks receives or gets from the borrowers. And at the moment, our kind of recovery estimate remains at 70% of the initial exposure, as the situation in Armenia does remain difficult, and its borrowers do not get charged fees and nor interest for loans that they have not repaid. To address this and to maximize the recovery for the investors, Varks continues to perform cost optimization and then focuses resources on portfolio recovery. Capital service.
Capital service. The first question is, how do you plan to ensure that capital service won't tunnel money during 7-8 years repayment period, just to make sure that make it enough to protect our investments? So the investors, let me go straight to the point here. There are 4 things. The thing number 1, together with capital service, we're about to conclude an escrow agreement, which is a trilateral agreement, us, capital service, and their bank, which will enable to technically control and prevent anything, any funds withholding. Not entire capital service portfolio will be subject to this escrow agreement. However, it's a certain part stipulated in our restructuring agreement, which is sufficient to ensure repayments. Second, we have a clause in our restructuring agreement which makes capital service to ask for a consent if certain costs that the company is going to perform exceeds X amount of euro. I cannot disclose what X is, as this would be confidential at this stage. The company has been really showing very good faith in terms of honoring this clause so far. The third thing is a cash sweep, which means that if the operation profit of the company reaches a certain level, then excess cash can be distributed to investors. Thus, repayments will happen fast. And the third is the amortization schedule itself, what capital service has so far been fulfilling. And it's a legal, this amortization schedule is a part of a restructuring agreement, which is capital services legal obligation to stick to it. On the top of that, we're in the regular contact with the company's management, and our risk team, together with the special exposure management team, monitors the situation at the company. Capital service, on which basis PLN get a preferential treatment over euros. PLN is fully repaid in equal installments, while euro has still 82% at risk in January 24. Well, indeed, there are Polish zloty. There is a Polish zloty exposure, and there is euro exposure. Polish zloty exposure is repaid faster, while euro exposure has a so-called bullet, or 80% at the end of January 24. So, the investor, your wording is perfectly right. Let me explain why has it been structured in this way. The amount of Polish zloty in the total debt of capital service is only some 5%, while the biggest part of the exposure is nominated in euros. So in this situation, you have two options. First option is what is the current option, that Polish zloty repaid faster, but in much smaller amounts than euros. Euro investors receive more than zloty investors, simply because monthly payments in euros are higher than zloty payments, but zloty payments were paid fast. We could do it other way around. We could make Polish, if we extend Polish zloty so that there is a bullet, then Polish zloty payments would be just not small. I think it would be symbolic. And I'm sure there would be other investors who would find this unfair. Therefore, we suggested we decided to go with the first option, which we think would be optimal in this particular case. Janusz is asking, Mintos, is it true that they are expanding their business using Mintos borrowers' money? Did they pay according to the plan in May? Which loans are paid back first? The older ones. Well, Janusz, if you allow, I will address your question from the end. So the investments which were made first are repaid first. So the sequence is the same also in this particular case, capital service. Have the company performed the payment in May? Not yet. Payments, capital service pays at the end of each month. So far, capital service paid February, March, and April like a clock. And we believe that the company will continue doing so. In terms of the general part of the question, whether the company developed the business on the cost of your cash, the investors, I would rather say that the company survived at the cost of investors, but by withholding certain cash. Otherwise, the company would simply go bankrupt, and everybody would lose. Them, you, the investors, and of course us. Therefore, I think the Janusz question is answered. The next slide, please.
ExpressCredit. Why do you still offer loans from Finclusion and ExpressCredit? I think these two questions we already answered as part of the general questions. As for the general update, so ExpressCredit is the other lending company where we were able to reach an agreement on restructuring, and we believe we have been able to achieve very beneficial outcome for the investors, as the agreement calls for support or from the other entities in ExpressCredit holding, and that will ensure that the repayments that the investors should have received from the borrowers or the for the buyback price will be covered by end of July 2024. On kind of in addition to this, as we were finalizing the negotiations and legal documents, ExpressCredit holding continued to make regular payments, and then actually kind of had from the beginning of the year has transferred approximately €500,000. So we have agreed that the remaining of the liabilities will be covered with the help of other group entities as well. So all in all, we believe that's a very beneficial outcome given the dire straits of Zambia as an economy and the kind of actual default it is in, and the significant currency devaluation there. AlexCredit.
AlexCredit, please update on AlexCredit. The investors previously we advised you that the portfolio has been transferred to the third party, the servicing collection company. Collections up to date at around 100,000 euros, and those money will be transferred to you, the investors. The problem we have here is similar to one other Ukrainian client. To transfer funds from Ukraine to Latvia or to any other country, you need the bank. Currently in Ukrainian banking industry, there have been quite a tightening legislation and also regulation when it comes to any funds to be transferred abroad, outside of Ukraine, regardless whether it's euro or hryvnia. Ukrainian banks currently are heavily monitored by so-called financial monitor units, which are placed at each of a commercial bank in Ukraine. However, they also report to National Bank. Basically, to make this long story short, together with the servicing company, our partner, we are in contact with two banks in terms of how do we make sure that the cash is transferred and what kind of documents are required for that. There's been a good progress. There's been a strong commitment from the collection company side to resolve the situation, and we're currently working on it. So that would be an update on AlexCredit.
Akulaku. What about Akulaku? So in a way, I guess no news is good news. So Akulaku has been making the regular payments as agreed with the scrupulous precision, and already more than half of the initial amount or the initial exposure at the moment of suspension has been transferred to the investors. And at this pace, the remaining amounts should be transferred by the year end, and there's also a possibility of faster repayment, and that we are at the moment now negotiating and discussing with Akulaku. Monego. Could you please update the payment forecast for Monego, CashWagon, Capital Service, and Finko AM? Would it be possible to speed up the collection of pending amounts? Well, in the beginning of the presentation, we had a chance to share with you our forecast for the second quarter. So that would be the update for all those cases mentioned here. In order to speed up collection, it depends case by case. Please believe us, the investors, we're doing everything possible. However, there is a saying, it always takes two to tango. Not always, I'm not talking about specifically these three companies, I'm talking in general now. It indeed takes two to tango. Sometimes our customers that are in trouble, they have to help us to help them by being proactive, by being cooperative. When this is the case, for example, Credit 24, we can reach a solution fast and recover fast. Sometimes we have to enter the legal process, which takes time. Sometimes we're entering into complicated negotiations, which also takes time. Let's stay with Monego. What is the cooperation like with the liquidator? With the liquidator, cooperation is the following. First of all, we have an on-ground lawyer, which represents us in front of the liquidator. Secondly, in the recent time, we have established a bilateral contact with the liquidator and his team with video calls, emails, and there has been a shift from formal letters and formal answers to those formal letters in Albanian language to simply kind of a professional English language question and answer, request, complaint, whatever conversation. We hope this will also be the way forward. Next slide. Just to kind of add on the possibility of speeding up the collection of pending payments, as Dmitry mentioned, kind of on one hand, kind of until the payment plan or restructuring has been agreed, then it does definitely take two to tango. As for the moment when the restructuring plan has been agreed and the payments start to flow in, then the pace of those payments typically is very much tied to the underlying borrower payments. And also this kind of pace of the borrower payments goes into the payment plan in terms of kind of how we structure that, and then for kind of what payments we agree. And as much as we would like to kind of hasten that, then it typically is a very much function of the borrower payments. And even if there's kind of there's other entities from the group of lending companies which support the lending company, then their ability to support is typically a function of the borrower repayments in their countries. So once you have agreed the payment schedule, then it is still very much reliant on borrower payments, as you would expect from investments in loans. Aforti.
Recoveries are not shared equally between investors. The latest Aforti recovery should be lead to a 20% decrease for all, not some chosen ones. Well, the investors, first of all, we're glad to share with you that we have recoveries in Aforti case. And this is also going to be a message to the markets that Mintos, although legal route is not a preferred route, but Mintos will protect investors by all means and do everything possible to recover your cash. And this is what is happening with Aforti. How this cash is distributed exactly in the same manner as we had a chance to share and explain it with you. It is part of your user agreement, whereby first investments get repaid first. We value your feedback that maybe this...
But it's the first repayments. It's correct. It's not the first investment. It's the first repayment.
First repayments, exactly. Thank you, Jan. Will investors receive all money Aforti owns them? Let me share more with you what is actually happening with Aforti. Currently, there is bailiff appointed and enforcement is taking place. What does that mean? It means that the bailiff within the Polish legislation framework is seizing companies' assets that can be identified. What kind of assets are these? Cash on accounts first. Secondly, and in parallel, shares of Aforti in other companies, because we have enforcement on Aforti holding as well. Secondly, receivables, the loan portfolio. So as much as possible to recover from those assets will be, of course, paid back to you, the investors. Unfortunately, in recent month or year, it was difficult from Aforti to obtain any kind of information, which was one of the reasons we've chosen this legal route. So therefore, giving an exact and precise estimate at this point of time, when we have just started the enforcement, would be not correct and would be not maybe precise. So therefore, we think that we will be still successful in recovering funds there. And once again, hope other Polish LOs will also be aware of what is happening and what can happen if no information is shared and no cash is paid.
All right, and that wraps up the questions we had compiled on kind of for the presentation. There are more questions unanswered on Slido, but unfortunately we are out of time. So thank you for participating in today's call. The call will be made available on Mintos YouTube channel, and please do follow our regular updates on recovery of funds, which the next one will be in a bit less than a month. And also do join Mintos community where you can share your questions and including about recoveries, hear answer from us, and discuss those questions with other investors as well. So thanks again, and cheers.
Have a great afternoon.